Hello, hello, hello. I need to lay all this stuff to the side. Huh? Well, I'll just start with one of these. All right.
He broke you yet?
Yeah.
We don't like you now.
Well, Jeannie, how are you? Good to see you. How you doing? How are you?
I'm Jim.
I know you. Can you hear me okay? You can hear me, but I'm not on. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hear me? Can you hear me all right? Okay. First of all, let me just say thank you so much for being here. Let me kind of tell you a little story, and then we'll kind of get into some of the fundamentals of what we're going to talk about for the next little bit. You know, as a youngster growing up, I was very, very blessed that I had a father and a grandfather that gave me perhaps the greatest gift of all, and that was introducing me to this great sport. They were both doctors. Growing up in a small town, my grandfather more so than my father was more of a hunter than a fisherman, but he did fish a lot. Well, my grandfather taught me a lot about fishing, but he taught me a lot about the anatomy of fish, how fish see and how fish hear, which helped me a lot through my later years in life and helped me through my tournament days of competing for fish and competing in bass tournaments. The importance of how fish see and how light affects fishing lures, how light affects fish, why fish feed early, maybe bright days, low light conditions at night, how fish hear vibrations. And that helped me, as I said, tremendously. And it helped me in my lure selection later in life. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get along. But I didn't realize the importance of that until one day growing up in Middle Tennessee in a little town called Lynchburg, Tennessee, where I fished a creek called Mulberry Creek. And it's still today one of my favorite forms of fishing, and that's moving water. But back in those early days, the only place that you could purchase a fishing lure, we didn't have Bass Pro Shop stores. We didn't have big department stores where you could buy fishing tackle. The only place you could buy fishing tackle was at hardware stores. But they had a little hardware store in Lynchburg called Motlow Hardware. And every day, as I'd walk back and forth to the creek, I'd go through the square. I'd go in, not every day, but periodically, I'd go in Motlow Hardware. And they had a little counter there with Arbogast fishing lures there. And they had one bait there called a jitterbug. And that bait today is still made. But I'd take it out, the fellow there at work there, he'd get it out and he'd show it to me. I'd look at it, take it out of the box. And that bait retailed back in those days for 75 cents. I was 7 years old when I looked at that bait. It was a bait, frog-colored bait, had a big metal lip, and went blah, 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 as you reeled it across the surface of the water. Kind of a funny-looking bait. But I wanted that bait so bad. And finally, one day, my grandmother gave me 75 cents, and I purchased that bait. Well, in a small town, the town would close. Everything would close up on Wednesdays, a half a day. And my grandparents, we'd go to the creek or we'd go to a lake. And my grandmother would spread a big blanket, and she'd sit there and crochet. And my granddaddy, he would fish redworms on the bottom for chinky pins, big red ears. And I had me a metal rod and a little old Shakespeare reel with braided line and a section of monofilament we call catgut back in those days. And I tied that bait on, that jitterbug, and walked down on a point probably from here to that green. And as I walked down on that point, I looked to my right and I saw 2 bass swimming along. I've told this story before many times, but it's what really kick-started my career. And I saw a bass about 2 pounds swimming along in this lake called Cumberland Springs Lake, a big spring-fed lake. And behind it, off to the right, about a foot behind it or 2 feet, it was about 1.5 pound bass. And when I saw that, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. So I turned my little rod and I started making false casts. And I started rocking, and I was so excited, I fired the jitterbug out, and I made a pretty good cast. I missed the fish by about 20 feet. But what impressed me, when the bait hit the water, both these fish stopped. And I know they couldn't see the bait. No way they could see this bait. But instantly, I had remembered some of the things that my grandfather had taught me about anatomy, hearing. They heard that bait hit the water. So instantly, what I did, I started reeling. And as I started reeling, both fish turned in the direction of the bait. I said, they hear that bait. They can't see it that distance away from here to that gentleman in a white Bass Pro cap. I stopped the bait, they stopped. I started the bait, they started moving to the bait. And he always said it seemed like the bigger fish are always more aggressive than the smaller fish. Well, naturally, that bigger fish was ahead of the smaller fish. I'd stop the bait, they'd stop, I'd move the bait, they'd move the bait. Well, I got a little bit closer, and as I got a little bit closer to the bank, the bigger fish was within about 3 or 4 feet of the bait. I stopped it, and here is a piece of plastic with a metal lip with 2 big old treble hooks hanging on it. And my heart was pounding so hard, I could barely hear that wobble of that jitterbug. But as I reeled it a little bit closer, the 2-pounder made a dash and just blew into the bait. And to witness that and to see that where he could visual then, could see the bait explode on the bait, I reared back with that piece of junk rod that I had, which I thought at that time was a state of the art, the old metal rod. And I can see some of these 80-year-old people that I'm looking around the room at. I started reeling. And I reeled about 6 or 8 feet, and I watched this fish jump. And what was amazing, this pound fish was right there with him trying to take the bait away from him. And I was witnessing all this. And just, it was so amazing. And I got him a little closer to the bank. And when I got him a little bit closer to the bank, I was so excited, I started dragging him. And I got him a little bit closer. I just reached up and grabbed the line, threw the rod, and just grabbed the line and took off running as fast as I could and dragged the fish up on the bank and took off running as far as I could up on the bank, reached down, grabbed the fish, took the bait out of his mouth, laid the fish down, reeled up the line, and took off running back, showed my grandparents. He had a stringer. We put him on the stringer, took the fish back, made a photograph of the fish, and that one fish remembered the sound of how they reacted to it when they saw the sight of the bait, how they reacted to it, and I've never forgotten that. But that one fish probably turned my direction and really kick-started my career in fishing. But I remembered the rod, I remembered how difficult it was to cast, but all of those things just fell into place. But that bait, and later there was another bait called a Hawaiian wiggler. And I saved up a little bit, and she bought me that bait, and I learned how to fish it. But what I learned to fish baits that were easy to fish, that weren't complicated to fish. But as time went along, I learned to take equipment that was easy to fish. So I'm going to spend just a minute and talk to you about equipment. How many people know the difference in spin cast to spinning to bait cast? How many people use spin cast? Hold your hands up. Well, this is considered spin cast. This equipment right here. How many people use this type of equipment? Well, this type of equipment probably started more people to fishing than any other piece of equipment. The Zebco 202, the Zebco 33. Because basically, it's a very simple piece of equipment to use. It's got a button here, you push it, and you can cast with it. There's no backlash involved. It's very simple to use. So many people that use it have a little bit difficult in using it, even as simple as it is to use. People take this piece of equipment. When you take it, they want to throw it as far as they can throw it. You can be a lot more accurate at a short distance than you can at a long distance. Have you ever noticed people get in a boat, they go along and they make a cast as close to the bank as they possibly can. But the people on the bank, they get and they try to throw it as far out in the lake as they can throw it. You can be, remember that, you can be a lot more accurate at close range than you can at long range. Tiger a minute ago, he could hit that green at close range a lot easier than he could hit that green at a long range. When you cast, casting is all an eye and wrist contact. Eye and wrist coordination. It's all coordinated with your wrist and your eye. So, when you use this piece of equipment, most people will take this piece of equipment, and when they take it like this. They hold it, and when they cast like this. They hold it with the handles out. And when they cast, most times they cast, and more times than not, when they load the rod, more times the bait, it goes straight down. And the reason for that, they try to overpower the bait. When they throw, it either goes like that, it doesn't go much further than that power line right there. You're not loading the rod when you hold it like that. If you'll watch the rod tip right here, when you load the rod, if you'll look at my wrist and you'll look at the rod tip. Now this applies not only to spin cast, it applies to bait casting, and it applies to open face spinning as well. And we'll go through that in just a second. If you're teaching yourself or you're teaching your youngsters to use push button, open face spinning, or bait casting, whether you play ping pong, whether you use a golf club, whether you use your wrist in so many things, your tennis, it's all in the wrist. And the same applies to bait casting, or spinning, or open face, or closed face. So, if you hold this piece of equipment, you have the tendency to cast it with the handles out. You hold it like this, and when you do, you cast, and your lure goes about like that, because you cannot load the rod when you hold it that way, because if you'll watch your wrist and you watch the rod tip. But I can make a little adjustment by turning the handles up. Your wrist will bend more in this position. Now watch the rod tip. This stupid little thing. Now look at the rod tip. I can load the rod. You see the distance? As I said, distance is not all that important because you can be a lot more accurate at close range. Oh, I missed him. That was a good hit too. That was a good fish. No, I know he was right there. But if it's a little bit big, heavy, you can catch it right here. But when you throw, just put the handles out. If you cast left-handed, turn the handles down into this position. Because if you look at your wrist will bend so much more in this position. Now, if you're a youngster, like, say, Hot Shot right there, this rod, come here a minute. Can you come out here a minute? If you look right here, you wouldn't want to start, if you had a push button, you wouldn't want to start him with a rod that tall. You would want to start him probably with a rod about that tall because he can handle a piece of equipment like that. This might be okay, but he'd be better off starting with a rod and reel about like that. He could handle that a lot better. Maybe this. Cast that. Can you cast that? That's what I thought. Can you cast that? Cast that for me. I'll hold your water. I'm thirsty anyway. All right, now look. You know how to do that? Look. Turn that over. Now, look here. Take your right. Are you right-handed? That's what I thought. Look here. Here. Take the wrist. Look. Take your thumb. Put it right here. Look. Put your finger on the trigger guard. Now, mash the button. Let's reel it up. Now mash the button. All right. Well, that's pretty good. If you just work with your child in the backyard, get him a piece of equipment. All right, can you do this? See? But if you turn the handles up, you'll do a lot better. Okay? Here you go. You got it? Hey, come here. You can have that. All right. Now, all it is in your wrist. Now, you're welcome. Thank you. Now, this is open face spinning. This probably, with the exception of beginning with push button, this probably nationally is the #1 selling piece of spinning gear nationally. It outsells bait casting because of it's so versatile. Now, when you use this piece of equipment, the actions, probably the #1 action would be a medium. And a medium rod with a fast tip. A fast tip would be a rod with fast action would be about a 20% tip and 80% backbone. This tip here is probably 30% with 70% backbone. But when people use this piece of equipment with line tests of 10, of say 8 to 12, you might could go up to say 14 with this piece of equipment. But when you use this piece of equipment, the key to it is to drop the bait just a little bit, say 12 inches or so, to where you can load the tip when you cast. Load the tip. So when you cast it, reel it up to where you can load the tip, that when you cast, you can get distance if you need it. And there's enough backbone in that tip, in that rod, where you can get enough distance to load the rod. And you've got enough backbone to handle a heavy fish if you get one on. But when you're reeling or playing a fish, look where my hands are as I reel that bait in. You see where my hand is? Now where's my hand? It's in front of the support bar. You see here? Watch. It's not behind the support bar. It's in front of the support bar. So when I made that cast, I did one thing. I came in, I went, made the cast, and as soon as I made the cast, what did I do? I moved my hand above the support bar. Now, why did I do that? Let me show you why I did that. If you fish an open face spinning rod for any length of time through the day, what happens? It will wear your these two fingers, it will wear. My wife can do that, and I can't do it, and it makes me so mad. It will wear this out right here, right there. People have the tendency when they make that cast, they put these two fingers right there. And over a period of time, after the cast is made, they put their fingers right there between that support bar. And over a period of time, it wears you out. Now, why does it do that? All spinning rods are weight forward. Now, I want you to watch this. All spinning rods are weight forward. Now, watch. I'll take the weight off the tip. Now, watch what happens. Watch this rod. Doink. See that? Watch that rod right here. Doink. Now watch me make one adjustment. Watch this. I'm going to move my hand right there. Look how balanced that rod is. See? See how balanced it is? Now, just balanced as it can be. Now, I moved my hand there, and what I've done several things here. When I brought my hand in front of that rod, I freed up that. I eliminated that soreness right here. I balanced that piece of equipment. I created more sensitivity. I created much more sensitivity. I don't have anything between my arm. I don't have that reel to feel with. I've created much more sensitivity, yet I extended the rod length to support for leverage under here. When I hang a fish, I brought the length of that rod back that when I hang a fish and he runs, you see that support right here? See that rod bowing? When he's pulling hard, I've got all that support. I've got much more length right here for support. So I've done several things after I made that cast, I put my hand right up here. Now another thing you want to do when you use open face spinning is when you make the cast, when the cast is made, once it's made, pull back on it. Now, why do you want to pull back on it? I'd give you this rod for that statement, but I can't. That's Johnny Marsh's rod. Hey, now he'd kill me if I gave it away. But anyway, you're throwing that loop out. If you don't, what's going to happen, if that loop occurs and you reel that loop in there, the next cast, you're going to throw that loop out and you're going to throw line with it and you're going to have a mess. So what you want to do when you use that, what you sad about? Are you sad? Huh? You say nothing? Okay, that's all right. You happy? I am too. Okay, so remember, the rod is weight forward. But once you make that change, I got weight on the tip. So once you add weight to the off of it, so if you can remember to do that, eliminate that and go here. Now, with bait casting, thank you. When we use bait casting is used by a lot of the professional fishermen. I use bait casting a lot for heavier baits, for heavier situations, fishing heavier cover. If I'm flipping, into heavy stuff, using heavier weight lines, I'd say it's 50-50. I use spinning a lot, and I use bait casting a lot. So it just dictates the line weight and the terrain or the cover that I'm fishing and the size of the bait that I'm fishing. I cast it a lot. I pitch with it. I pitch with that a lot, but it's personal preference as to the terrain and to the thickness of the line you use, the heaviness and the braid, the fluorocarbon, or the mono that you use. Now, when I'm casting with this piece of equipment, there's some tricks that you can use with this. The palming plates on these reels today, let me back up before I get to that. The rods that I prefer in bait casting are definitely fast action. It would be a 20-80 action. And you see that action? That you do? Okay. That's a 20-80. It's about a 20 fast action is what it is. It's about a 20, breaks about right there. So that's right at a 20. That's a fast action rod. You got 20% tip and about 80% backbone. That rod is super sensitive. So for worm fishing, jig fishing, it creates a tremendous amount of sensitivity. It feels what you're doing. A rod is most sensitive when it's right here. From right here to right here. If I gave you this rod and you held it right like this, it's heaviest. It's heavy. Right here it's lighter. Right here it's its lightest rod. It's lighter at that point. It's most sensitive here, here, and here. So if you were worm fishing or let's say jig fishing, if you fish like you're fishing a plastic worm, you're fishing it from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. That's where you're creating the most you're getting the most sensitivity. It's most sensitive from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock, right there, your jig. And when you set the hook, you're setting it from about right here. This is where your strength is, right here. So when you set the hook, there's a hit. You just take up the slack and boom, that's where your strength is, right here. If your wife says, John, Joe, Mike, Paul, Larry, open this jar of mayonnaise. When you set the hook, you don't set the hook boop, like this, boom, like that, or way up here. You go boom. So when you open a jar of mayonnaise, you don't go, oh, you can't open the mayonnaise, let me have it. You don't open it here, or you don't open it here. Where do you open it if it's hard to open? You open it right here. You might go, oh, you can't open that? Let me have it. Boom. That's right here is where your strength is. Right here is when you set the hook. This is where you maintain your maximum pounds of hook setting pressure, is right here. And you don't maintain as much hook setting pressure as you think you do. You maintain maybe 6 to 7 pounds of hook setting pressure. If you use monofilament line and it's been in the water for a great deal of time, you reduce it even more. If you use a parabolical action rod or a medium action rod, you reduce it even more because the rod absorbs even more of the hook setting pressure. So a fast action rod, braid, you maintain it to a greater degree. So when you use this piece of equipment, here's something you might consider doing. Once you make the cast, if you take the equipment and you palm it right here against the palming plate, you create better sensitivity by reaching up and catching it here and locking your hand around the palming plate. You create more sensitivity than you do right here. If you hold the rod right here and you're trying to fish it here, no. You catch it here, and that way, doom, there's a fish, boom. You create more sensitivity. The rod's a lot more comfortable fishing this way. You've got more extended handle here. You can lay it against your foregrip here if you're fighting a fish, right here. Now, some rods have a longer handle. You can put it into your stomach, let the fish fight you. So you'll do much better that way. Monofilament line still has a place. I use it a lot. But monofilament line is a nylon. It absorbs water. The longer it's in the water, the more it absorbs, and you have a stretch factor. Sometimes stretch is good. So these are just some of the things. Your accuracy, we won't get into accuracy. Accuracy will come in time. You know, you'll get more accurate the more you fish. So we could put up targets and you start throwing at targets. Don't worry about accuracy right now. Just learn the fundamentals of casting. And here's another important thing. We learn by asking questions. That's very, very important. Be observant. Look around. Look what's going on. Look for feeding birds. Look for activity. But ask questions. Try to fish with knowledgeable fishermen. And don't be a know-it-all. Ask lots of questions. We learn by asking questions. That's how we learn. If I see you catching a lot of fish, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to ask you what you're doing. Now, here's something else that I'll just briefly touch on. When we go fishing, we don't want to use complicated lures if we're beginning. We don't want to go out on Table Rock Lake and start fishing 20, 25 feet of water with a bait that we don't know how to, like a jig or a worm, with a spinning rod with 8-pound test line and a 15-mile-an-hour wind. You'd be lost. It's complicated. It's real hard. Don't go to Table Rock Lake. Go to a farm pond. Go to a small body of water. Take you an inline spinner. Go to Bass Pro and buy you a nitro 1/4 ounce or 3/8 ounce inline spinner. That lure works for you instead of you having to work that lure. And just throw it and reel it. That's all you got to do. If the fish are active, they will eat that bait up. That is a sensational bait. It's not going to be good if the fish are 20, 25 feet in Table Rock, but it would work well in a small body of water. Another bait that would work good, take you a Cordell spot and throw it and just reel it. You may not catch as many fish on it as your big brother who's fishing Table Rock Lake, catching them 20, 25 feet, but he's more experienced at doing that than you are because you're just learning. But you're learning the fundamentals. Take you a buzz bait and just throw it and reel it. These are simple baits. You're learning. Take you a shallow running crankbait that you just throw it, reel it, stop it, reel it, stop it. Change one action into another. These are just simple. I've got a box full of them. They're just simple little baits that you just throw and reel. You don't want to get complicated baits, but in time, the more you fish, the more you'll learn. I had a city grandmother, and when I'd go to visit her, I'd get on the city bus and ride to a city lake, and I'd fish these simple baits, they were just simple little baits. And I caught fish in those city park lakes on just simple stuff. I may not have caught as many as I could catch in a big impoundment, but I didn't know how to fish those big impoundments at that time. But later, as I got older and I started learning, the more I learned, then I got to where when I got me a vehicle and I got me a boat, then I started learning how to do that kind of stuff. Then I started catching fish deep. But you learn, and I started asking questions, and I started learning how to do that stuff. But in the beginning, just learn how to use simple things. Keep it simple. And the more you do it, the more you learn, the more experienced you become. And if you love to fish, you'll learn. But this type of equipment is fun to use, and it's easy to use. But it's just ask questions. That's how we learn. And I'll tell you another way you can learn. Watch Bill Dance Outdoors. No. And hey, that'll teach you how to trip and fall in the lake or fall off a pier or something. But have you got any questions I can answer for you?
Over here, Bill.
Oh.
What line size would you recommend for a crankbait?
What line size would I recommend for what?
A crankbait. Crankbait.
For a crankbait? Well, it depends on the piece of equipment that you're using. Like on this piece of equipment, I probably use sometimes 12, depending on how deep I want the bait to go. But probably on bait casting, I use 14 a lot. But on a lake like this, if the fish were deep, I'd probably use 10 or 12. Because 10 or 12. My home lake is Pickwick Lake, and it's not a lot to. There's stumps. There are some. I fish a lot of 10 and 12 there. Yes, sir.
If you're fishing muddy water with a jig, will you ever run just straight braid?
I don't fish a jig and worm are more of an eye contact bait, and I don't fish them in muddy water. I'll fish them in dingy water, but when I do, I usually use a bigger jig where it's more bulk, and I use black and blue a lot because black holds its identity real well in a dingy environment. If it's real muddy, I don't. I might if it's shallow, and I usually fish become object oriented in a dingy environment, and I'll fish stumps and brush and cover. Real shallow fish go shallow and they become object oriented, and the reason they do, they get real shallow is because they can see better. Somebody else have a question? Yeah.
What's the biggest fish you've caught?
Biggest fish or bass? 14-1. And I caught him on a spinnerbait.
What size of rod should I use?
What size what?
Rod should I use?
Well, how? What size rod? Have you ever fished much?
No, I've only done it once.
Well, I would use a push button. How old are you? How old are you?
8.
Where do you live?
Springfield.
Where?
Springfield.
Springfield. Are you going to start fishing some? Huh?
I don't know.
You don't know.
You haven't sold him.
Huh?
You haven't sold him yet.
I hadn't told you. I'd use at least a 5.5, 6 foot rod. About a 6-footer. About a 6 foot. What would it take to get you to start fishing? Huh? That's something you ought to start doing. Huh? It's a lot of fun. Hey, I'd say about a 6. You're a lot bigger than that other boy. I'd say about 6 foot. Zebco makes a lot of nice ones. Bass Pro, go over to Bass Pro and look around. Huh? You ever been at Bass Pro? Well, check them out. They make some. I'd say about a 6 foot, and a push button.
What's the biggest perch you've caught?
Huh?
What's the biggest perch you've caught?
The biggest fish?
Perch.
Oh, about 250 pounds. And one of them is swimming over at Bass Pro right now in the aquarium. There's a big grouper. Now, I didn't say 400, Johnny. Where is he? Johnny caught it. Pardon?
Have you heard of the pumpkin seed fish?
I've never caught a pumpkin seed fish. I caught a pumpkin. You have? Where'd you catch it? Oh, a pumpkin. Yeah, I've caught pumpkin seeds. Like a bluegill, like a little brim. I know what you're talking about. It's in the bluegill. It's in the perch family. Yeah, they are beautiful. Yeah, they are pretty little. Yes, I have. They are beautiful little fish. Yeah, I bet a lot of people have never seen one of them, but they are beautiful little fish.
How many years have you been fishing?
I've been fishing since I was, since I was about 4 or 5 years old. Long time. Had what? How about that? What?
What kind of bait should I be using in a small golf course pond?
I'll tell you a good little bait that's hard to beat is those little inline spinners. They're real good. Ha.
What age do you, like I've got them at different ages, but when do you go from a closed face spinner to an open face spinner? Do you have like an age range that you would recommend?
Just when they're more comfortable with it. I mean, you can just bring them up. Both of them are very easy to use. All you have to do is just start practicing. I know my 2 boys, oldest boys, they were 8 years old and they started, on Christmas Day, I gave them bait casting. And Christmas afternoon, mid-afternoon, they could use it. And the ACS controls on bait casting now are set to where you can almost set them. I don't know how this reel is, but you can almost set them and they won't even backlash. You know, you can just throw them and the controls on them are set so well, but it wouldn't take very much to do it.
Bill Dance, ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank
That's the man right there. He told you, head to Bass Pro, pick up those nitro baits and all the great stuff he told you
y'all.
today. Hey, don't forget, Legends of Golf's here. Dude Perfect will be at Top of the Rock on Saturday. Kids are free with a paid adult. Pick up your tickets at the gate today as you exit. You can also buy them the day you get here. We're grateful to have you all. Hope you enjoyed your day. If you get a chance, high five Johnny Morrison every time you see him, y'all. Have a great day. Be careful going home. Thank you.